Nick Hutchinson has written a book about his life. It's called A Mingled Yarn. Nick Hutchinson, good morning.
Good morning.
Why did you decide to write this book?
Oh, goodness gracious me. There are various different reasons. The first and major one, I guess, is that my father, who was an Englishman, very Englishman, and a fairly extraordinary barrister, grew to be a very ripe old age. And when he got to his 100 point, it was time for his only son left to go look after him. So I looked after him for 3 years, well, 2.5 years, because he died at 102.5. And he had just written a book, and that had occupied him for like 3 or 4 years. And he kept on saying to me, "You've got to write a book." I did write a book.
You certainly did.
There it was.
And it recounts quite a life, and we'll get to that in a sec. You mentioned your father. Your mother was Dame Peggy Ashcroft, one of England's great actresses. Your father was a lord. Technically, you're Honorable Nick Hutchinson. How did being part of that world early in your life shape how you viewed the arts generally?
Well, I was knee-deep in the arts as a child, obviously because of my mother. She dragged me off to the theater when she was rehearsing when I was 4, And my grandmother, who was an extraordinary lady, who on my dad's side, mother of my dad, was a sort of a center of the Bloomsbury group.
Which is a writers, an intellectual
writers,
group.
Artists, thinkers, everything group of kind of early day hippies, except not so hippie.
Bohemian sort of stuff.
Bohemian, upper middle class. Yeah. So, and my dad was passionate about painting because his dad collected paintings. He commissioned Matisse when Matisse was just an ordinary painter to do a portrait of my grandmother.
It's in the book.
It's in the book. And so, but we were the professional classes, and England was a horrible class society.
Well, maybe that brings us to why you came to Canada.
Well, it does.
Tell me about that.
Well, I first left England because I went to train in theater in France, because obviously being the son of Peggy Ashcroft was a bit of an anchor. It reduced your scope. And so I was my own self in France and was doing a 12th night in French. 12th Night, which is an extraordinarily wonderful, apt comedy these days because it's all about trans. Boys playing girls, playing boys, playing girls. And we were having a lot of fun when all of a sudden May 68 exploded on us and everybody else in France, and the revolution happened. And it happened for me, and I guess for my generation, at a time where, what were we looking at? We were looking at, the norms of the 50s that seemed to go on eternally. So we were ripe to question everything and to take our dreams for reality and fight in the streets and argue in the theaters, which we did. Theaters got closed. And I kind of learned political theater, agitprop theater, and all that sort of thing. And so that turned me into a revolutionary for a bit. Or ever, I don't know. And
it sounds like you got uncomfortable, though, at one point with the aims of the revolution and second thoughts, maybe.
Well, difficulties, because here you go. Like, I know we were innocents, right?
With dynamite in the trunk.
Well, I was just going to get to that. I went back to England after all our ideas about revolution in France came to an end when de Gaulle came back and matraqued everybody. And so I went back to England and got recruited into a sort of something called the Angry Brigade, which was kind of like I guess we would be terrorists nowadays.
Kind of like the weathermen in the States.
We were the weathermen or the Red Brigades or whatever it was. And we were a little group. Anyway, and little by little, when you're up against the state, you have to make this decision about, do you confront or do you give in? And what are the implications of giving in? What are the implications of confronting? So there I was, because of course, we weren't going to confront. That was our mission. And by the time, and that went from one thing to another, and ultimately to dynamite in the back of my Mini, which leaked. And it started to feel very uncomfortable. And I started to realize that this was not what I was going to be. Just when I was on that dilemma of the leaky dynamite, two of the most lovely girls who I worked with in Strasbourg, who were from Quebec, wrote me and said, look, you got to come to Montreal because we got an anarchist theater group and we need you. Deliverance. Yeah. So that's what I did. Spent a year and a half in Montreal and just decided that I really needed to do theater in English because I could do it in French, but I wasn't exploring what I needed to explore. And so I thought I'd go and join the San Francisco Mime Troupe in California. But on the way there in Vancouver, my girlfriend and I, Sandy Nichols, got stopped by a friend of hers who'd persuaded us to go to a commune, back to the land commune in between Darcy and Pemberton, where I ended up with this amazing horse called Snake. And he became my pal. And the reason why I stayed in British Columbia, really, because I had a horse. And I went everywhere on a horse. I went into the Chilcotin on a horse. I did the rodeo in Mount Currie on Snake. And then eventually went back to Vancouver because we are in the time, this is something that's very important, I think, in life to think about. At this time, we're in sort of 1971, and our generation had been an uppity generation. We had caused trouble. Well, it was a quite smart guy in those days called Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Really smart Trudeau, actually. He used to take risks. One of the risks he took was to create these programs to fund arts, culture, adventures, things for that troublesome generation to get their teeth into. And he created a culture which has existed up until now. It's sort of dying, right? Because we're all dying. But he actually created structures like the Caravan, structures like Tamanous Theater, art galleries, all sorts of things.
Through grants and programs.
Through grants, and it gave people work and things to do and imagination. So it's pretty fantastic. And we are losing culture. Culture is being completely destroyed.
You think so?
Yes, of course it is. It's only cultural. Culture is a means towards increasing consumption of products delivered in post-haste by Amazons. And that is when you talk about what you believe to believe in when you go to vote. Oh, you believe in the economy. You don't believe in the culture. So there are people who are dying of fentanyl because there's nothing to do and there's no imagination left.
And how does a place like Caravan keep that alive? What's the cultural legacy of Caravan then, do you think?
I think the cultural legacy of Caravan is twofold. It changes and shifts, and maybe it's not quite the same culture as it used to be. But first off, it's to do with the land, right?
Why is that important, the land?
Why is the land important? You may ask. I mean, crikey. It's no longer crown land. It's the land. It's the land that hurts. It's the land that's dying. It's the land we have to tend. It's got your feet in the dirt. And until you have your feet in the dirt, you've got your feet on the pavement. And the pavement doesn't render you much, whereas the ground does. That's one part. And the other part is community, because the caravan was about toughing it out and living and being together and having common goals and talking about things, and deciding things collectively, right? We weren't a top-down organization. We were a collective organization. We still are.
The book is really frank about your generation, about the rebellion, about the sort of free love, about some of the regrets, some of the one night stands, the drugs.
What about madness?
Madness. I'm getting to the madness. I wonder, but it's all, it's adventure, right? There's a lot of adventure in seeking new boundaries, whether that's physical or intellectual. Can you still do that in our world? Can you still go out and find an adventure?
Well, I can't because I'm 78.
You.
I mean, shit.
but a 20-year-old you.
A 20-year-old.
Yeah. And where is it?
Where is it? How do you do it? In our day, when we had a beef to grind in the universities, we occupied universities, and eventually a few got shot at Kent State, but mostly we demonstrated. Today, when students demonstrate to try and protect the Palestinian genocide, they're arrested and called anti-Semitic, and that's not allowed. So, the whole attitude towards how you deal with authority is completely different. It's tough. So the adventurous people are going to have to find that way. There's going to be one. There's going to be an adventurous way. There has to be, because life's impossible right now.
And will theater be part of that adventurous way, and how?
That is the great question. Because theater has been eradicated by Netflix and the screen, right? I mean, it started with the movies, and then it got to streaming. But my hope is that when the internet collapses, when Elon Musk is shoved off to Mars, where he should stay, then how will people communicate? Well, the theater is what it's meant to be. And theater is meant to deal with two aspects of life: tragedy and comedy, or comedy and tragedy, extremes. And the reason that the book is called A Mingled Yarn,
which incidentally was my first question. Why is this book called A Mingled Yarn?
Why is the book called A Mingled Yarn?
I skipped it, but here we are.
Good, perfect timing. The book it comes from a play that nobody really knows much about, although it's a very interesting play. It's called All's Well That Ends Well. And so therefore, take it from me, it's it's all about gender, women and men. And the men are cut down to size in this play, which is amazing. Anyway, there's this anti-hero called Bertram, who is made to marry this girl who loves him passionately, who's just a doctor's daughter, and he's up here. And he goes off to the war to escape this woman he doesn't really love, with his two buddies who are identical twins. And the identical twins are sitting at a campfire, and they're talking about how Bertram's, off tonight to deflower this gorgeous virgin that he's decided he's going to have. And one of them says, the web of our life is of a mingled yarn, good and ill together. Our virtues would be proud if our faults whipped them not, and our crimes would despair if they were not cherished by our virtues.
Do you feel that describes your time?
I think it describes life.
Who do you hope reads this book?
I think anybody who's ever interested in the theater should read it, because it does depict an era of theater actually the whole era of the century, in a way. You know, if you follow the threads, that's primarily. People who love horses should definitely read the book. People who have had lots of problems with what they call bipolar these days, you know.
And we didn't talk about this, but the madness that you referenced earlier.
Madness, because I think the issue of madness is extraordinarily important today, because the whole of society is aimed at normalization. If we want to normalize wiping out a whole population, we can do it. We just can do it by not talking about it and getting used to the fact that every day 100 people, half of them kids, are being killed. That's normalization. When we lose our marbles somewhat, and everybody loses their marbles, I challenge anyone to think of a family that doesn't have somebody who has lost marbles, up or down. It's getting mad. And Shakespeare was preoccupied for at least 4 plays, major plays. Twelfth Night, Hamlet, Macbeth, and Lear are all dealing with mental disorder. And it's fascinating. Nobody has written as much about mental disorder as Shakespeare. And so I just think that the way that we like to look at psychiatry now is we look at psychiatry as normalizing the person, you know, in order for them not to display, you know, excessive tendencies. Mm-hmm. So theater is permission to explore the excessive, right? We've got to do that. It's the only healthy way to get out of it. You know, counseling is all very well, but it all revolves into you. It's all about you. It's not about you. It's about us. And we've got to have a way of expressing all these things. And theater is the only way in art that does it collectively. Blah, blah, blah.
Well, I'm awfully glad your father convinced you to write a book.
Thanks. It's been great, Chris. Always fun. I'm so glad we talk in person, because it's quite different than getting a sore ear.
Thanks again. Nick Hutchinson is the founding director of the Caravan Farm Stage Company and the Caravan Farm Theatre in Armstrong. He's the author of A Mingled Yarn.